Good morning. This is a tutorial on how to create a calculator. First thing you're going to do, I'm going to be using Netbeans IDE. This is for Java programming. We're going to go Java application we're going to start off with. So it's to file, new project, or this little icon here, file, new project, or this little icon to start a new project. We're going to create a Java application. We're going to call this one calculator. And we're not going to create a main class because we're going to create the frame as a main class. The actual GUI frame will make the main class. You should also choose the location where you want it saved. And for my pupils, it is on your Google Drive. In this case, I'm putting it in your guys' M2019 folder, but you will choose your Google Drive location and then save it in there when you want to create it, so that it's backed up on the cloud. Okay, now the next thing you're going to be doing is you would set up a package. Now a package is just a container for whichever different project files you'll have. We're only going to be working with one project file in this project, but you can call this whatever you want. You would normally try to call it something logical. Pac-Man isn't that logical, but it's funny. So you would have a project file and you would then create, so if you right click on the package and you go new, you can then create a class. Now another way of doing that is just over here, or file, new file. All of those will work. I just prefer clicking on the package and going new, and we want to create a JFrame form. If you want more options, you go other, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of different things you can create, including in different languages and so forth. But in this case, we will be the Swing GUI forms, and we would choose a JFrame, or right-click new JFrame. It's a commonly used template file. Okay, so now when we click next, we're going to give this file a name, and we're going to call this a GUI. Calc, so calc GUI, whatever. So the GUI for the calculator, it's going to be inside the package Pac-Man, and we go finish, and then now it would have created us this. Now you'll notice that there's a couple of different panels here. The first panel I want to draw your attention to is the right-hand side. This is a palette. This is all the different GUI components you can add to it. There's swing containers, there's controls, etc. Now, what we're going to be going on from down there, then there's properties. Properties is the object that you've selected in here. So this is the frame property. So if I want to make this calculator as a title, if I can spell calculator, then you'll notice if I preview my window, the title will be calculator. So you can specify your frame properties over here. You can change the colors, fonts, blah, blah, blah. You can change whatever you want there. On the left-hand side here, there's a Navigator bar that shows you all the components that are inside here. At the moment, we don't have anything. The biggest change is now between the source and the design. The source goes into the actual code of your project, and that's back here. So first I'm just going to work on the design of the calculator, then we'll get into the source code and get that working. Now in a RAD environment like this, or in Netbeans, and actually in Java you work with layouts, and you'd actually have to apply the layouts through code or whatnot, but in this case we can just do it through the rapid application development, the front end of the IDE. And we can go set layout and we can say, okay, we want this to be a border layout. Now, there's different layouts. Free design means everything's related to something. So if you place something, you place an object in relation to another object. Absolute layout means exactly where you put it is where it is. Border layout is the one that we're going to work with to start off with, and I'll show you that now. Don't worry about those. I'll go through those in other videos. And the only other important one we're going to use in this one is a grid layout, and that's basically just a table. So you can say how many columns and how many rows you want of objects, and then you can specify that there. So border layout. I'm going to your containers. You'll see if I try to put in a text box, let's say. So if I've got here a text field, you'll see there that I can put the text field at the top, I can put it on the right, I can put it at the bottom, I can put it on the left. We call them north, east, southwest. Okay, and then you'll see that there's a center. The center one is the big one. So when you make a window bigger, so for example, if I put a text field here and I put a button in the center, you'll notice when I preview it, it'll start off this size. When I maximize it, the button will become big. So the thing in the center of the frame will become big. The thing in the north and east and south and west will not become big at all. So let's work with that there. Okay, so I'm going to delete that button because we don't want that button there, but you'll see the text field can stay at the top here. You can choose what you want there. Now I'm going to delete this text field purely because I want to allow for more objects to be in there. Now a panel is a container, meaning you can put more objects inside that. So for example, if I create a panel on the north, I create a panel on the bottom, and I create a panel in the center. then that means I can work with multiple different things on here. So now on this top one, I'm going to set the layout to be a grid layout. Now you'll notice it'll immediately become small and I can't see it anymore. That's because there's nothing contained in it. So if I want to edit that one specifically, I'll then double click on that panel. I can then go and, so on your navigator on the left hand side, I can then make it wider. And now on this grid layout in the properties, I can say 1 column, 2 rows. And now what this will mean is that when I drag items in here, so if I now put a label in there and I put a text area in there, text field, in there, I'll then have those 2 items in there. And now when I go back to the frame, they'll be at the top there. Now I would want my buttons in the center here, and over here I could have, I actually don't know what I wanted this for, but let's just put this as a grid layout as well. And then in this grid layout, let's just put a label there so I can display some form of progress, or I don't know, whatever the hell I want them to there. But for now, if you do that and you use the label, just drag it down into what you want. Okay, so we now got these items here. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the buttons, so the numbers and so forth. So this will be my calculator at the top here, so I can, for example, say Mr. Brad's calculator. And then here, I can change the text to be blank. And at the bottom here, I can say version beta, whatever you want. Again, you can change properties of things. So if I highlight more than one as well, you'll see it'll show common properties at the side, and I can say I want the property of these to be center. So I'll just have that. I mean, this is pretty basic, silly little calculator, but you guys, for your project, you're going to create a more complex calculator. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have to create the buttons. So for our buttons, we would want it to be a grid layout. Now if you look at a calculator, so let's just open up a calculator. I'm not sure if it's actually going to show you it because I'm on a recorded frame, so I'm not sure if I put it on top of this frame if it will show you it or not. But a calculator has 3 numbers by 3 numbers, sorry, it'll be 4 rows by 3 columns. So if we go and we set the layout of this grid, set this to grid layout, which it already is, you go to the grid layouts on your navigation bar, you can then set the columns to 3 and the rows to 4. So I just had to quickly send a message. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create buttons. So we're just going to add the buttons, so button, 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 button. Got a knock on. Okay, so we're going to add all the buttons. I'm going to pause the video for while I add the buttons because you don't need to see me adding buttons. Woohoo! Add buttons. Okay, now that I've added buttons, I can then rename. You go, if you right click on them and you go edit text, you can then give them values. So I can go put them like this. Now another very important thing that you should also do is you should also change the variable name. We're going to get into coding just now. So you might want to call it something that you'll be able to identify with it. So if I call them but1, but2, so I know that but1 is for the value 1 and but2 is for the value 2 and but3 so forth, then I know when I'm in code I know how to refer to them. This should also be done for your any object that you're going to have to refer to from inside code. You should rename. So any action element you should rename so that you can know what to refer to it from, and then keep 2 naming conventions. You'll notice there that I call it txt display and but for buttons. It's technically CMB command button, but is more funny. But yeah, so you keep 2 naming conventions. I forgot to add a frame, so for the plus, minus, subtract, etc. So if you do something like that and you need to, sometimes it's a bit tricky, but if you add a panel just to random anywhere and you drag it in and say I want it inside the frame. Now I was quite lucky to added it to the right side, which is good. Sometimes it can be tricky to add it to the correct location of it, but it worked quite well now. So now what we're going to do is we can add the buttons for plus, minus, subtract. We're not going to do all of them. I'm only going to do plus and minus. I'm not going to do the rest for you. As I say, you're going to be creating more an advanced calculator than me. Okay, so now we've got a situation where we're needing to get into the coding of this calculator. So if I go to the source of it, now I'm in the actual coding side of this. I'm just going to zoom in a bit onto this so that you can see the code a little bit better. You'll notice there that there's already a whole bunch of generated code. Now, in lessons, I went through the fact that every single one of these is an object. In other words, this button is an object. This button is an object. This button is an object. We've created something called GUI calc inside of Pac-Man, inside a calculator. So we have calculator, Pac-Man, GUI calc. So that's something we're creating. Now, every single one of these is actually a class that somebody else created. So someone created a button class, someone created a text field class, someone created a label class, so forth. Now, if we go back to the source code, you'll notice there in the generated code, now all this stuff we don't need to do, but you'll notice there that all of these have, if I go all to the bottom, there's quite a lot of code there for one, but for two, here it says private JavaX, which is a project, swing, which is a package, JButton, which is a class, but1. So exactly the same as we have our structure, calculator, pacman, GUI calc. Every single object has its own structure. It's a JavaX swing.jbutton. And I'm creating an instance of it. So we call this an object. So we have classes of blueprints, in other words, a structure for this, and a object is an instance of that. So for example, you're a person. A person is a general class. You have certain attributes. You have hair, you have nose, you have ears, so forth. Now that is the construct of a person. Then from there, when you create an instance, you are the object. So along those lines. So here, JButton is the class, but1 is the object. So now you'll notice that here they're initialized. So in other words, here we say is equal to new, blah blah blah, so that we initialize those objects so that they exist and we put them where we want. You don't have to worry about all this code, but if you were to code this calculator, this is what you would be doing. Is you'd be adding the layouts, you'd be creating instances of the buttons, you'd be putting them together. In the RAD environment, it does that for you. It can be a little bit tricky, but you'll realize when you're dragging and dropping things, it doesn't always go exactly where you want. But you'll realize it is working with code. So if you want to be precise, code it from scratch. But the RAD is quicker development for the GUI. Now, on from there, if we go back to here, we're going to need a variable to keep track of where we are. So I'm going to, exactly the same as the way they created it down there. You'll see that there's private and there's public and so forth. Now, instead of creating a button, I'm going to create a variable to hold a number. So we say private, which means no one can access this outside of this class, int, which is saying this is going to be a data type of an integer, and we are then going to say answer, meaning what the current answer is. So that's fine, so we're going to say private int answer. Now, I'm actually going to create a second one. I'm going to create a second one, display. Now, so I've created two variables, one integer which will store whole numbers, another string which will store text. I'm going to call it display. Now, what do we want to happen? If we look at this, when the user, let's just start off with the basics. When the user presses 1, 2, 3, whatever, we are wanting it to increment that number into the display here. So I go to my source and we know we've got a couple of buttons. So what we're going to start off by doing is creating a method, so public void but1, or let's just call this 1. Why not? I'm going to create another variable called variable called 2, and so forth. I'm not going to pause the video while I create the other ones for these, but this is what's called a method. A method is something that you can call and it will execute what is in here. So when you press play, this public static void main is run, and then that calls this method up here, which initializes stuff. We're going to look at adding action elements. When the user clicks a button, we can run a method, and we'll get to that after I just quickly create these methods, so we can do this in structure. Just don't forget to also add a 0 method, because 0 is also a very important number. Just for interest's sake, there is a much better way to do this if you're working with parameters, but we haven't dealt with parameters yet. But if you are a little bit more advanced or knowledgeable in programming, you can use a parameter to send through what value you want to add, rather than have to recreate all these individual methods. So what we're going to do now is in the design, we're now going to go and create action events. So events that the computer will listen out for, so when it happens, it will invoke a method. So if I go right click on this and I go events, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different events I can listen to. And the default that we're going to do is we're just going to do action performed. But for interest's sake, you can do mouse click. Now, in the mouse clicked event, you can also be more specific and check did the user right click or left click or middle click or whatnot, and you can actually get into the properties of that and determine exactly what click they did. But we're just going to stay with the events of an action performed. To do this as well, you can just double click on it, and that will do the action performed defaultly. So we're going to now, it adds an event, and you'll notice in the code that it generates, it will also add this physical event to the button. There's a lot more complexity to this, and at a later stage we'll understand more about what's going on there. But right now, when the user presses button 1, we want the method 1 to run. So when the user presses button 2, we want the method 2 to run. Oops. Yeah. When we press, don't forget to save regularly, button 3. Again, I'm not going to make you watch all of this, so maybe it'll be funny. The code in these specifically, the reason why is because it's under all the generated code, and also it has quite a complicated parameter. So for example, I want to now add a key listener, so when the user types the keys, it will invoke the methods once. When the user presses 1, it invokes the method 1. Then what's going to happen is, unless the user types, well, when the user types, I'll have to this event, I'll have to replicate to be able to run this method. So that's one reason. And second reason, it's under goodness knows how many lines of code, that depending on how advanced your GUI is. So if you ever need to print this code for your project or whatnot, it will be cumbersome. So here I would only print up to the generated code. I don't have to print what's below that. So you'll see all of these here, it's about line 192. Meanwhile, if up here I'm on the beginning line, so that the marker or whoever is working on this project, you can look at easily. Let me carry on finishing. So let's get this calculator to work now. So if we go to our design and we click on 1, it would run the method 1. If you press Control and click on that, it will take you up to it. So now what do we want to happen when 1? 1, we want our display to equal display plus 1. And now this is the character 1. It's very important to understand that. Is that this is a character 1, it's not the numerical value 1. We can actually add 1 there, because if you add something to a string, it will convert it to a string. So if we append a string to anything, it appends it. Append means put on the end. It doesn't add it to it. Whereas if I did it to answer, it would add it to it. But this is when the user is typing something. And now on the text display object, we want to set the text. So it's a property, an attribute. To change an attribute, we run set. To get an attribute, we run get. So we do .set text, and we're going to say set text to display. So we'll change the text to update to that. Now we're going to do the same thing for 2, so copy paste. We're then just going to change it to 2, same thing for 3, change it to 3, same thing for 4, change it to 4, same thing for 5, change it to 5. Isn't this fun? Let me quickly pause. So we have all of them done, and we've got this working so far. So let's just run our program. Let's see what we've got so far. I think it's already going quite successfully. So let's go. You can be in the source as well. Don't have to be anywhere that. You press play. It'll ask you what you want your main class to be. In this case, we've only created one main class, and then you'll run that. Now you'll see there's my calculator at the top. It's a bit ugly, but there's my calculator. So when I press 1, null 1. Ooh, 2, null 2. Okay. Now the reason why it says null. All the buttons work now, so my 1, 2, 5, 0, and so forth work. But the reason why it says null is because I didn't initialize my display. So in other words, the first time I said display is equal to display plus 1, display was null. It hadn't been initialized yet. So what I should do is in my constructor, which is where my program is introduced, I would initialize my variables. So I'll make my display equal to blank, and I'll make my ans equal to 0. We haven't dealt with ans yet. That'll only be when we do the plus and so forth, which is what we're going to be doing now. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a method called public void add. And I'm going to create another method, public void subtract. Now that we've got those methods, we're going to have to figure out what we do with that. Now, to do this, what we are going to do is we're going to have to work out exactly how we're wanting to display this. So let's go to our design. I'm going to name this label here, change the variable name to LBL ans, just so that we can actually work with putting our answer there, and then the next number can be added into this here. So the users can see what the answer is currently over there. Instead of having to have an equals button, we can just put the answer there. So when you press plus, it'll put it there. I suppose we could have an equals button as well. But anyway, that's up to you. You guys work with your project. You design it the way you want to design. I'm just doing quite a basic one. Alright, so if the user clicks add, we want to add whatever the user's got into the display into the answer. So one thing I would want to do is I'm going to change this to be not editable, which means that the user will not be able to change the values there unless he presses there. This forces it to only allow numerical values, because if it allows text we would have a problem here, because right now we want to change what's on the display into a numerical value. Now the way you do that is we want to go int current, so this is the current number that the user's put in, is equal to, and you call a class, guess what it is, a class again, like what we're creating, so integer dot parseInt, so we're doing integer, which is a class someone else created, parseInt is a method that somebody else created, and then what we can do is we can take our display and pass it into an integer, semicolon. So we're literally taking what we're currently displaying and appending it to that there. Now what we'll do is we'll then say ans is equal to ans, so what it is currently plus current. So in other words, if the user put if this was the first time working, it will be 0 plus current, because 0 is what it initializes as, because the constructor initializes everything, and then plus the currents, whatever the user's typed in, will now be appended to that. The next time it goes, whatever's currently in ans will then be appended to that. So now we're going to make lbl ans.setText to be ans, and we want txt display.setText to be display, but we would actually want to initialize display again. So we're starting the display from scratch. Now you'll see this gives me a problem, because ans is what data type? It is an integer, and I'm trying to put it saying set text. I'm trying to set a text property or attribute as a numerical value. So to work with that, I can just do that. Plus string, and that converts it to a string. So to change from a text to an integer, it is integer.parseInt, but it's very simple to change from a integer to a string. You literally just append it to a string. Now on from there, if we get this should now work. So let's just test this if this works. Looks like I have an error in my code somewhere, which it hasn't compiled properly. So if I run press play, let's test my calculator so far. So let's just test my addition. So if I go 1, 2, 3 plus, you know what I haven't done? Very clever of me. I didn't actually get this button to run the add. So now when I double click on this button, I must say this button must run the method add. Run the method add. A very important shortcut as well is your control spacebar. Control spacebar will suggest items to you. So now if I go design, I go back here, and I press play. Let's test my add again. Sorry, just before we get to that, if I don't like the way this is looking when it defaultly opens, what I can do is I can go to my JFrame, and you'll see here it says there's an option there, minimum size. So if I set my minimum size to let's say 400 by 600, and I go save all, and now I'll press play, it'll start off much bigger. Okay, that's probably a bit too much, but you get the idea, is that you can actually specify what the minimum size is. You can also make it so the user can't edit it at all, the size, so that will help you just with regards to so I'm just going to do 400 by 400 and see what that looks like. I'm not going to continue with that because you can mess around with that. So now you'll see my calculator starts off much better. It looks much prettier. I can even make it so I can't resize it. So this will be the size that it is. So let's go 1, 2, 3. And now if I go plus, you'll see it'll move the 1, 2, 3 to the top. And if I want to say plus 25, plus, I'll go to 148. 25 plus. You could have an equals button here as well. The equals would make more sense. I want to code the minus quickly, then I'll code an equals as well. So as soon as I click plus, it will do what the calculation of adding whatever's in here to whatever's here, minus whatever's in there to whatever's there. But the equals would be, okay, let's finalize whatever I asked it to do. Which is actually quite tricky, because we'd have to store the sign. So the equal sign's another baby. And if you want to work with the equal sign, if you said this plus, and then you typed in a value, and then you said equals, you would need to know what sign you had pressed. So you would actually have to store the sign, and then we'd have to work with an if statement. And that will be part 2 of this video, is the equal sign and maybe a couple other functions. But as I say, this is the basic intro of a calculator. Goodbye.